coping solutions surrounding college applications and on overall mental health. And hopefully these can help guide you just a little through the hectic year we've had. We also have a panel of college students from a collection of outstanding universities. I would like to invite everyone in the audience to give your attention. And please, we really welcome any questions you have. If you'd like to save those or send them over, we will try our best to answer as many as we can in the Q&A session following all of our presentations. So first, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Si-Hui Lee. She is the Director of Counseling and Psychological Services at Phillips Exeter Academy. She has a decade of experience as a board-certified clinical psychologist, and she is a clinical instructor at Harvard Medical School. She specializes in cognitive behavior therapy and treatment of anxiety disorders. Not only am I deeply impressed by Dr. Lee's experiences and expertise, but we are also immensely grateful for her compassion to help the community by speaking for us today. With that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Lee.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this important panel. I am going to share my screen. Let's see. It's an honor to be here, and I think, you know, as Daniel was describing the Lotus Project and the Let's Talk program, I think, my gosh, I wish I had these resources when I was applying for college. My family and I moved here to the United States from Taiwan when I was 10 years old, and we didn't really know much about the college application process and the landscape, and we kind of figured it out as we went. And boy, I think I would have benefited from a resource like this. So I thank everyone for making this possible. And let's get right to it. And I think it's interesting that we decided that the date of this presentation landed on November 1st, because we know that today is the deadline for early decision. So just to take a moment to exhale for those that have applied and got your applications in today. Another deep breath for people who are still working on their applications and working for regular decision deadlines. We're going to be okay. We're going to get there. You know, so I work at Phillips Exeter Academy. This has been a stressful time. And all the students I've been working with, juniors, especially seniors, there's this momentum through this moment. There's this feeling like this is it, right? All of my years of hard work, all the investment my parents have put forward, all these years is really culminating to this one moment when I apply for college and I find out where am I going to land. And there's that momentum, that pressure, that this is what we've been waiting for this whole time, almost to see if all the work is going to pay off. And I don't, you know, it's hard to do these Zoom presentations because I can't get a feel of the room, but I wonder if some of you can attest to that there's been this big push to this moment. And what I want to say is it's dangerous to have that type of frame of mind, and here is why. When we have that pressure upon ourselves that this is it, right? This is it for me, this is it for my family, the amount of pressure that places on parents and students is undeniable. In addition, the amount of fear that's placed on parents and students is undeniable. What do I mean by that? In all my years of working with students and parents, I find that this is the moment when students ask themselves, do I have what it takes? Are all the years of my hard work, studying, working, volunteering, doing research projects, you know, doing all these summer programs, is it worth it? Is it going to pay off? And then I hear parents ask themselves, have I done the best by my child? Have I given them all the opportunities? Have I invested in the right things? Have I started them off on the right foot? And there's all these questions that we ask ourselves as parents and as students that really places a lot of pressure in this process. And as you can probably tell in the way that I'm describing this, this also has a significant impact on one's mental health and physical health. I can't tell you how many students I talked to in the past few months who are trying to get their application together, particularly for November 1st, and they're not sleeping, they're not eating, because they're too stressed and too worried and too anxious. And what they say to me is, Dr. Lee, I just got to get to November 1st. I just got to get my essays together. I just have to get my letter of arrest lined up. Right? I just have to get to this point and then I'll get better. And I just got to get to this point and everything will work out. But there's danger in that. Because what you and I also know is that life goes on, right? After November 1st, life goes on. After December 1st, life goes on. After January, right? Even after letters of acceptances or rejections come out, life goes on. And so when we lie to ourselves and say, we just got to get to this one point and we'll be okay, that's pretty dangerous. And again, we have people who are not sleeping, not eating, and are up, worry sick to themselves about what's to come. That really worries me. That worries me about the amount of pressure that's placed in this time, not just for students, but for parents. A lot of parents I work with, they are, using WeChat groups or parent line groups, and they're chatting and they're comparing. Well, are your kids' applications in? And what about which ones are they applying to? And how many essays did they write? And there's a lot of comparing. And all that really is people trying to manage their anxiety. And I don't know about you, but when we get into that game of comparison, it really doesn't help with our anxiety. It could actually exacerbate it and make it much, much higher. As Asian identifying students, I think, and individuals, I think we also have to acknowledge how much the pressure also comes by just our culture alone. I know as an immigrant, and my family didn't have a lot of money and we didn't know what we were doing first coming to the States and trying to figure out stuff, that I felt like I owed my parents to do well. I owed it to them to work hard, to get into a really good college. And that, I want to bring pride into the family name. And I fear so much that there will be shame to the family if I did not perform and if I did not get to top schools. And there was a lot of pressure in that. And in my family, some of those pressures are not talked about. It's very much unspoken expectations that I think come from family, but I also think comes from ourselves as individuals and students. We want to do well by our parents. We want to make our families proud. And that sense can kind of add on top of an already stressful time, an already stressful expectation. So what are some tips for parents? I want to remind parents that how you support your students now is going to be really important in your relationship going forward. You heard me say earlier, life goes on. Right? After these deadlines, after the acceptances, after the rejections, life goes on. And what breaks my heart all the time is when I see conflict between family members around college process. And that conflict, that friction can have a lasting impact in the family dynamic. And so we want to watch for that. I do assure you that most likely the student and the family have a shared goal. They have a shared goal of I want to be successful. They have a shared goal if we want to have a good life. We have a shared goal of I want to be successful and make people proud. Those are usually the shared goals. The road to that goal, the ways of what that would look like might be different. And so I ask parents if this is a great time to remind your child that you love them no matter what, and that you believe in them, and that you believe that they're going to work hard. You believe that they have a plan in place. And you believe that they're going to put their best foot forward. And short of that, you're here to listen and you're here to support them and you're here to partner with them. I think what's been one of the hardest things for me to watch as I'm helping high school students is when they have a very clear sense of what they want to do with college. They have a very clear sense of the type of schools they want to apply to, the geography, geographically where they like to be. They're very clear. However, their view of what their future will look like is very different than their parents. And then that generational conflict comes in and they don't talk about it, or when they do, they're fighting about it. And that's really hard. And I think parents, this is a good time to practice listening to your child to understand where do their passions lie? What do they see themselves doing 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now? If we put our lens a little further out, What are some things our kids are excited about? And if we listen to that, that may help when we are kind of tunnel vision into the college process right now. I will also say to the parents, find support for yourself. This is a stressful time for you. I'm a parent myself now. My kids are a little young, so we're not worrying about college just yet. But I can already tell as parents making decisions of, what do I want to get my kids involved with? What do I want to expose them to? We're constantly trying to do our very best by our kids. And there's a worry that we're going to mess up somehow. There's a worry that we're going to make the wrong decision, and that wrong decision somehow is going to send them down the wrong path. That stress we put on ourselves as parents is quite big. And so I think it's important that you find support for yourself also. And be careful not to work out that stress and anxiety with your child. They're already stressed. They're already anxious, okay? To put your anxiety and stress on top of them would actually be pretty counterproductive at this time. So make sure that you have a good support system for yourself, whether it's your own family members, your partner. Certainly, mental health professional can be a great support at this time. And students, how you take care of yourself right now and before and during the college application process matters. I caution against the thinking, once I get into blank, my life will be better. I hear that every single year. If I get into Harvard, things will work out. If I get into Princeton, things are going to be okay. Once I get, right? And I get that. I get that goalpost that you want to set for yourself as kind of a target you want to go for. But then what happens if you don't get in? What happens if you're waitlisted, which is becoming more and more common these days, that universities are waitlisting students while they figure out what the compositions will look like, right? And so what happens then? When we put ourselves in the situation of, once I get into blank and then life is going to work out, what happens not? That puts us in a very scary place. And people can be devastated and crushed when they don't get into their top choices, right? So there's a dangers in thinking about that. And I also want to remind students, I work with all the time, it's not just about getting in, it's also about graduating. Just like same thing with high school, right? I want you to walk on that stage of graduation panel. I want you to be proud of your work 4 years in. I want you to be thriving as a student. Life does not stop, just like life does not start when you get that acceptance letter. So how you take care of yourself, how you cope with stress, how you get feedback about who you are as a person right now is really, really, really important. College is just one piece of information. I want you to think about all that you are and all that you can be and get feedback from not just a college process, but from your parents, from your friends, from your clubs, from your organizations, wherever it might be. And remind yourself that your parents do love you. And they ultimately want you to be happy and to be healthy, right? And right now, all of us may be kind of tunnel vision into this college process. But at the end of the day, what really matters is our health, our well-being, and our relationship with one another. I just want to quickly point out the Maslow's pyramid and a hierarchy of needs. And what Maslow he's a motivational psychologist. What he says is that, we kind of have, our needs are in tiers, and we have to take care of fundamental needs before we can move on to what he calls self-actualization, when we be the best that we can be. And so I urge all of you to make sure that you're taking care of your physiological needs. That's the foundation. Make sure you're sleeping. Make sure you're eating. Make sure you're exercising. Make sure you're feeling safe and cared for around your community, and make sure you're feeling loved by those around you. And it is with those foundations that then we can thrive and blossom. And I remind the parents the same. I know my time is running out already, but I want to just remind you all, this isn't it. There's a lot of momentum through this moment, but you know what? There's so much more to life, and there's so much more ahead. And please allow your values and what's important to you guide you. I cannot tell you how often I have students that graduate from Phillips Exeter Academy and come back and say, oh my gosh, I'm happy. I didn't get into where I wanted to, but this school fits me really well, and I'm happy and I'm successful. And life goes on, right? And so when we get too caught up in the nitty-gritty of it all, I worry that we get lost. So I urge you all, while you're getting stuff together, to sometimes pull back and ask yourself, at the end of the day, what actually matters? And at the end of the day, what kind of life do you want to live? And what kind of life do you want your children to live? And my guess is that it's going to be further and more beyond just a title of a school or just a brand name of a school. So thank you. This is a quick rundown of the things that I want to share. I'm happy to share more. I'm happy to share more stories when we get to more of the Q&A section. But thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. I think that, even me hearing the idea of the this is it mentality and the high pressure environments are definitely something a lot of the audience, I think, can relate to. So thank you for your insights. We do have time to take a quick 1 or 2 questions. And if we don't get to your questions, we will answer them at the end in our Q&A session. But one question we have from Yvonne is, what do you feel is the biggest issue with that mindset, that this is it mentality? Why is it that the Asian American / especially Chinese families only care about ranking about the universities versus other extremely important elements such as school spirit, whether the school is really suitable for the student, etc., while all Chinese parents only want a well-recognized name so they can brag?
My experience tells me personally in my own family, but also in all the families that I've worked with, is sometimes I think Asian families may not have all the information about colleges and the landscape of colleges and the way that things have moved around. And what do I mean by that? Years ago, it really was about brand name, perhaps, right? You want the Ivies, you want the top names, you want the fancy name brands. But what we also know over the years is that it's not just about the name brand, it's about the program. And there are award-winning top programs for various fields that are not in the Ivies, right? So if you and your family, if you know what you're passionate about, if you want to go into engineering, if you want to go into whatever it may be, what you might want to look for is the top program for that field. I'll speak for myself. When I was coming up for psychology, first of all, my parents were like, psychology? What is that? So we had to have a conversation about that. And what I was looking at were the top programs for clinical and counseling psychology. And so I actually got my graduate degree at the Ohio State University. My parents had no idea what that was. They did not understand, like, oh my gosh, they were definitely not going to be able to brag about me to their friends because it was not a Harvard, it was not a Princeton, it was not these well-known names, but it was a top program. And what I said to my parents is, listen, when I'm done, people are going to call me Dr. Lee. And that was enough for my family. Oh, okay. And again, not to minimize my family because they really wanted us to prioritize education. But my parents did not grow up in the US. They did not get their education in the US. They knew very little about the US institution, educational institution. So all they knew, of course, right, were the brand names. All they knew, of course, perhaps is what they hear from the media or from other family chats and whatnot. So I don't fault them for that. It just wasn't something that they were educated in. And so I want to kind of broaden the perspective a little bit, and let's all get educated about all schools, not just the Ivies. And I also think people should be really honest about Ivies. They're great schools, no doubt. But acceptance rate and graduation rates are very different. I can't tell you how many because I don't know the numbers, but I know that there are a lot of students that have gone into an Ivy school only to transfer, only to not finish, or only to, right? So again, you heard me say before, it's not just about getting in, it's about graduating. So you want to make sure that it's a good match for you and that you'll be happy for those years that you're going to be there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. For anyone who has any other questions, we will make sure to have those towards the end in the Q&A, and we'll get to them. But next up, I'd like to invite Dr. Juliana Chen. Dr. Chen is a child and adolescent psychiatrist at Massachusetts General Hospital and Newton Wellesley Hospital. She serves as Associate Director of the Massachusetts General Hospital Center for Cross-Cultural Student Emotional Wellness, which supports the emotional wellness and mental health needs of Asian and Asian American students. Thank you so much, Dr. Chen.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Daniel. And thank you, Dr. Lee, and thank you to Project Lotus, and of course, the team at Let's Talk. I'm so pleased to be here as one of the organizers of Let's Talk, especially and in my work with Asian American students. Events like this and organizations like Project Lotus are so near and dear to my own heart. And like Dr. Lee mentioned, there was nothing like this when I was growing up many years ago. And so many memories come back hearing you speak, Dr. Lee. I'm going to add on, Dr. Lee already covered so much, and Dr. Lee, I agree with everything that you said, and I think you and I will be underscoring some of the same points, which I think is just fine because I think you can't say them enough. So what we all already know, I hope, is that unfortunately teenagers today are facing increasing amounts of pressure and stress. So this is true generally for all teenagers, but it is especially true, I would say, for juniors and seniors facing college application season. So perhaps even more so now, Daniel mentioned this in his introduction, just that all that students are having to face in this current climate with an upcoming election, increasing social and racial unrest, including racist attacks against Asians. There's increased job insecurity in general and uncertainty about the future. And with COVID-19, our teenagers are facing a lot, and the list goes on and on. Some things about stress. About half of teenagers in the United States report moderate to extreme levels of stress during the school year. And keep in mind, these numbers are from pre-COVID times. Teenagers self-report in general their stress levels to be higher than what they would consider to be healthy. And teens also report stress levels that exceed that of adults. So meaning if you, for the parents who are with us, if you experience stress in your daily life, which I imagine most of you do, know that on average, in all likelihood, your teenager is more stressed than you are. And in a recent Pew Research Center survey, the majority of teenagers identified anxiety and depression as being the #1 problem their peers are facing. So point being, our teenagers are stressed. Why do we care about teen stress? And again, this may seem obvious, but I think it's really important to think a little bit about why do we care? So from a college application standpoint, just on a very practical level, we care about stress because it gets in our way. It gets in our way of doing things, right? So a little bit of stress can actually help motivate us, but too much stress and stress that goes on for too long of a time or for too large degrees impacts our concentration, our motivation, our learning. It impacts our productivity and performance. And overall, it makes it hard for us to do what we need to do. From a health standpoint, we care about stress because it negatively impacts our health across the board. So this is physical health, immune health, emotional health, mental health. Stress will often interrupt our appetite and sleep. It will cause things like headache, body ache, fatigue, and at its most extreme, especially for those of us who may be more vulnerable, and there are many of us, chronic stress can also lead to mental health issues. So, for example, along with genetics, stress is one of the top 2 biggest risk factors for depression in teenagers. So we really, really need to be paying attention to stress levels in our teens, especially during times when stress is likely to be high. So that means now. What stress might look like. So those of you with us who have possibly heard me speak before may have heard me talk about this. What stress might look like in kids and teens? Well, the hard thing is it can look like a lot of different things. It can look like sadness and crying. It can look like irritability and anger, or trouble with concentration, focus, some of the cognitive changes, as well as social isolation, irresponsibility, or as we talked about earlier, physical symptoms. It can also look like things like missed homework assignments, or not getting a college application essay done, or falling grades, or more time on screens. So it can really, really look different kid to kid. And as we just talked about, more severe prolonged stress can lead to mental health issues, things like depression and eating disorders, also things like suicide thinking, self-harm, or substance use. Lastly, on the surface, stress can also look like nothing at all, meaning your kid, if you would look at them, you wouldn't know that anything was wrong. This is particularly true for, I would say, quieter kids, kids who keep their things, like what's going on in their life, inside. Kids who perhaps are highly perfectionistic, very high achieving, very hardworking, and who just naturally push themselves to keep going. From the outside, these teens may look like they are doing just fine. They may even look like they are excelling, but it's important to know that inside they may be having a hard time. And this isn't to scare any parents who are here with us, just to let you know that it's really, really important for us to be paying attention to how our teens are doing. And as Dr. Lee talked about so eloquently, this is one of many, many, many reasons why having a positive parent-child relationship in general and during times like now is so important. We want our children to know that they can come and talk with us when they are stressed or worried or having a difficult time in any way. And we want them to know that we can listen, that we will listen and support them, whatever it is. I really can't underscore this point enough. Parents are often asking me, oh, what can I do? What can I do to best support my child in college applications, in school homework, in music, in sports, whatever it is. And I will tell you, a positive parent-child connection is hugely supportive and hugely protective. And it is one of the most powerful ways parents can support their children and teens. And it sets our children and teens up for success now and in the long term. So shifting gears a little bit, just thinking about their stress, well, then what causes stress? So this is going to be very brief for the sake of time, but looking at the different research studies, of which there are many, there are in particular certain stressors that seem to kind of rise to the top for most Asian American youth. So things like parental expectations for high academic achievement, pressure to live up to the model minority stereotype. These themselves, I think, are stereotypes of the Asian community, but there is truth here, and our youth experience it. This absolutely applies during college application season. And this includes that pressure, right, to be accepted into a top school or what a family may think of as the best school. These are also pressures. The difficulty balancing two different cultures, feeling strong obligations to our family, communication challenges with parents, also discrimination and isolation due to being Asian or Asian American. And I will say in my work with Asian youth, I'm a child psychiatrist, so I work predominantly with kids and teens and college students. But in my work with Asian youth, the number one thing I have to tell you that I hear from kids and teenagers and college students, the number one thing that they say is the most challenging and often the most painful to them, emotionally painful, is their difficulty in communicating with their parents. And they really, really want to be able to talk to you. And many of them say they've tried and it doesn't work. So not blaming you, not blaming them, just that it's just so hard. But your teens want this, your kids want this. And so hopefully we can help make that happen a little bit. So worries related to college application season. Unfortunately, and I think Dr. Lee addressed this and could probably give lots of examples. Unfortunately, in my experience, worries about college is just beginning earlier and earlier. So high school freshmen, sophomores, juniors are likely worried in preparing. I've seen middle schoolers, I've seen elementary schoolers talk about the pressure and worry about getting into a good college. And this is too much for our kids. For high school seniors specifically who are going through the process now, some of what I hear are worries like these. So things will work out for me only if I get into my top school. I'm a failure if I'm not accepted into college X or Y. My parents or family will be so upset or disappointed in me if I don't get in. So, you know, from my perspective, these are very, very black and white views of success that put too much pressure on our kids and teens. So many parents may be familiar with these statistics, but about a quarter of high school seniors, as I understand, do not end up attending their first choice school. And college acceptance rates at what many consider to be the nation's top schools, not just the Ivy Leagues, but like kind of the top programs, I believe their acceptance rates hover in the 4 to 8 to 9% numbers. So it's inevitable that our children are going to face some disappointments in these coming weeks and months, and that's okay. So especially now during college application season, I want to challenge the thinking of there being one right way, one straight path, or one best school. The reality is success is not binary. Dr. Lee also mentioned this, right? There are many, many paths to success, and those paths are rarely linear. They usually have detours and twists and turns and things we did not plan for or expect. And my guess is for the parents who are with us this afternoon or tonight, depending on where you are, my guess is this was absolutely the case for almost all of you. You started out one place perhaps you had dreams for something. Maybe you ended up there, but how did you get there? And maybe you ended up somewhere else. That's the path that most people have, these kind of detoured routes. And again, that is okay. And we want our kids to get that message that that's okay. I think kids and teens so rarely get the success and what it really looks like message. I think we get the message when we're young that it's one straight path and that's it. It's important for parents to remember that college application season falls at a critical transition time in teens' lives developmentally. So again, this will be really brief, but for child development experts like Dr. Lee and myself, we think about the teen years as most critically being about independence, about socialization and relationships, and about identity development. So what this means are things like our teens figuring out themselves in deeper ways, what they like, what they don't like, what they're good at, what they believe, what kind of person they want to be. It's a time for teenagers to practice making decisions on their own. It's a time for them, a really essential time for them to build self-esteem. And for seniors, that self-esteem can be so fragile now. So we really, really want to try to protect it. So a time for teens to make mistakes and to have some failures. And I realize this may go against a lot of traditional thinking, but for our teenagers to build the life skills that they need, right? They need the room to try new things, to socialize, to make choices, to make mistakes, and to experience those disappointments so they can know how to get themselves back up again. So again, I know this can sound really scary, but if you think back for yourself, times of disappointment, of failures or mistakes, I would bet were probably for you some of the times of greatest growth and learning. And that's true for our kids and teens too. And I want that for them. I'll mention related to self-esteem, because I think this is also a critical point. As a group, Asian American students on average do excel academically at the risk of reinforcing the model minority stereotype. There is some truth, right, on a population level. Compared to their same aged non-Asian peers, whites, Blacks, many studies have shown that Asian American students struggle the most with self-esteem. So just think about that for a second, meaning our kids do not necessarily believe in themselves. Whatever academic achievement they may have under their belt, they don't necessarily have the self-esteem to carry them through. This is something also that I see again and again and again in many Asian American students, including those who by any kind of traditional measures, parents or community would say, oh, this student, this child is a success. A lot of these students do not believe in themselves. And when they hit their first kind of bump in the road, they really struggle. And in college or beyond can be when they especially struggle, either academically, professionally, or emotionally. So building the foundation now or as early as we can really, really, really matters. And low self-esteem is not remedied by the acceptance letter from your top school. So we want to love our kids now. We want to support our kids now in being the whole person, right? No matter the outcome of a college application season. What teens should remember, I think this underscores and repeats a lot of what Dr. Lee said, so I'll do this quickly. But for teenagers who are here, if you're here with us, I hope you are. I know just because I say it, you won't automatically believe it, but I'm going to just say it and maybe you can file it away. This moment does not define you. Where you get accepted and where you end up does not define you. I know it may feel like the hugest thing and your future success depends on it, but it does not. This is just one moment of your life and you are already a success. College is less about where you go and more about what you do while you're there. And I agree with Dr. Lee about it's less about the name, think about the program, and think about the full experience, not just academically, but also socially. College is an incredible time for you to spread your wings. So please spread your wings, try new things, pursue what interests you, find out what you like and don't like, be open to mistakes and new experiences, and be open to feeling disappointed or nervous or embarrassed. But I promise you, just as I was saying earlier to your parents, those moments are going to be your greatest growth moments and the times that you most remember and cherish. When you are in college, really remember the basics of self-care. This is the boring health part, but the basics of self-care and all those things that your parents probably tell you all the time that's really annoying really do matter. So getting a good night's sleep, moving your bodies, exercise, also taking breaks, noticing your stress level, knowing what recharges you, connecting with friends. And above all else, to all of you teenagers out there, high school students, college students, please, please, please remember to be kind to yourself no matter what, because you deserve it. What parents should remember, and this is my last slide, for parents, I know we have 3 amazing students, so they can probably articulate it better than either Dr. Lee or I could. But I would definitely recommend for parents, please try to avoid putting extra pressure on your teens. They already have enough. Please definitely offer your assistance and support and be open to what your teen has to say to you back in return. Let your teen know you believe in their ability to make good decisions. This helps your teenagers develop the belief and faith in themselves to make good decisions. Don't compare your teenager to their siblings or other teens. It's unfortunately really not motivating. It's actually demotivating, and it generally leaves teenagers feeling bad about themselves. And please believe in your teen. Again, we keep saying this, but believe in them no matter the outcome. And it does not mean that we don't aim high. It does not mean we can't wish for the very, very best for our kids or for the top school. We absolutely do aim high. But remember that the best can take lots of forms. And part of how kids and teens learn to believe in themselves, this is that self-esteem part I was mentioning. Part of where kids first get that is when their parents believe in them, really, and letting kids know and feel it. So letting your children know you believe in them. I know you do, but letting your children know that you believe in them really matters. So have you ever said to them, I'm proud of you? And not just when they achieve something, just because. Like, you should be proud of them for even submitting an application. I believe in you. I love you. Be compassionate. If your teen doesn't get positive news, let them know it's okay, because it will be okay. Your teen will want to hear these words. And again, as Dr. Lee talked about, the most important things is believing in your teen and supporting them through this time and beyond. So listening, believing, and letting them know you still love them no matter what. I know we have some wonderful, no, that's all right. You're welcome, Daniel. I know we have some wonderful panelists.
Yeah, so I saw that we had 2 questions submitted for Dr. Chen.
Okay.
It's all right, we'll hold those towards the end.
Oh, sure.
And we'll move to the panelists. All right, and then I'll just make a note of these 2 questions. But thank you so much, Dr. Chen. I think your messages about students and parents can really resound with the audience, so thank you. So yes, we do have 3 panelists today. So now we'll go into our panelist discussion with students from a collection of outstanding universities. We felt that hearing these experiences of students who have gone through the exact same process many of you may be anticipating for your children can be a great point of education. And for any students in the audience who are looking more, of what to expect, this would be a great opportunity to ask those questions to these panelists. So thank you so much to Anweisha Mukherjee. She is Stanford class of 2024, Lily Xia, USC class of 2024, and Maggie Peng, Cornell University class of 2024 for joining us today. I do want to mention that Santosh Ramesh, who wasn't able to make it today, would be speaking on OSU. But Lily, thank you so much for speaking on behalf of Santosh. So we're just going to get into some questions for the panelists. This will be a panel discussion among the panelists. And then after this discussion will be the time to ask your questions either to these panelists or maybe to Dr. Lee or Dr. Chen, who already spoke. So the first question I wanted to ask the panelists was, would you be able to just tell your general story of your process through the college application process, your experiences with your own mental health, and handling your own mental health? Anweisha, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, so as obviously mentioned, I am currently at Stanford as a freshman. I think during the college application process, I did apply to over 10 colleges, which is typically considered a threshold. And I think for me, one of the biggest things to learn was understanding the person I want to be and also understanding the person I was at the time. Because the most challenging part of college applications is figuring out the story you're telling about yourself. And I think in recognizing that over time, as I developed, especially that Common App essay, which you use for every college, became something of catering a person I wanted to present in the sense of not only who I was, but who I was learning to become. And I think in a lot of ways that can be difficult because it looks at telling your story, including the ways you struggled, and that can be retelling trauma. And I had that, and I was looking at ways to cover that, but never sacrifice my mental health in the process. And if that means you're not ready to talk about certain aspects of your past, that's also okay. And that was something I had to learn along the way and understanding what that looked like in writing. And I think that was something that I didn't fully pick up on until I'd submitted more than one application of I should be okay with whatever essay I am presenting because that is representative of myself, regardless of how much of it you are prepared to share. And application readers are going to see that and it will come through. And I think that was probably my biggest regret too, is going into it with this thought process that I needed to have a perfect picture of the person I was supposed to be presenting and the person I was and how that would be presented, or that I really needed to cater to any college's needs, because in reality, colleges will fit your needs if you get accepted, and even if you don't, because it's about finding the right environment wherever you are. And understanding how that looked took away a lot of the stress I started with, and it took away a lot of the issues with time literally sitting at a computer, probably with an empty document for more hours than I'd even like to admit. I was really grateful with my family. I think for starters, being the younger sibling, much of what I was going through was something we'd already dealt with 8 years prior with my older sister. And so that was something that I was able to look at and understand and try and develop my experiences in a way that my parents had already seen it before. And my parents were really supportive in that thought. And I think what was really helpful with having my parents there is that I trusted them with my stories, but that was because they were open to hearing them. And I think that's the one thing to always take away, is to be open throughout this process and to be open without judgment, and understanding where everyone in this process is coming from, and that this is going to take a toll on the entire family. This took a toll on my sister, even while she wasn't living at home, simply hearing about my process. And that is something that you will have to confront. And knowing that confronting that comes from having a clean line of conversation, being able to support the student in their application process, and being able to support the student in whatever decision they make really helps. And that especially helps when these decisions don't all come out at once. So even after the application process is over, knowing that some decisions will be good, some decisions will be bad, and all of them are okay. Ultimately, the student's going to end up where they're supposed to end up. And I think that was something I want everyone to realize, is this process for me was not everything perfect. It also wasn't everything going wrong. I think that's true of everyone. And the biggest takeaway is to be willing to take that risk and be willing to let things play out. Once you've submitted your applications, you've really done all that you can. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Maggie?
Yeah, hi. So I'm Maggie. I go to Cornell. I would say that I had a pretty different experience, I think, compared to a lot of my friends and what I went through in terms of applying for colleges, because my parents were relatively hands-off in terms of what I decided to do. So it was not a lack of wanting to support me, because they really did want to support me. They really wanted to make sure that I was doing okay during this entire process. And they wanted me to get into a good school, but they really didn't know exactly how best to support me throughout this process. And so they actually kind of there was a lot of trust built into this relationship, where they've kind of figured that we'll let Maggie kind of deal with some of these things on her own. And it actually turned out to be really conducive in helping me figure out what colleges I wanted to apply to and what I wanted to do in college, because there was never really this kind of pressure of, oh, you have to go to this school or you have to do this major. So that was actually extremely helpful for me. I would say I want to talk really briefly about more of my stressors in terms of like what the most stressful part of the process was for me. I would definitely say a really stressful part of the process was just kind of feeling overwhelmed about, like Anwesha mentioned, the kind of person that I am. I was really fortunate during high school where I really I think I kind of realized earlier on that I wasn't going to do the clubs that everybody was going to do just to like pad my resume or whatever. I ended up joining a really small club at the time called Junior States of America, where when people heard that, they were like, what is this? We have no idea what this is. And my parents were kind of weirded out that I was in this kind of cultish, tiny little club that nobody had ever heard of. But I was super passionate about the things that I did in high school. And in that way, I was really lucky in that I kind of used that to sort of write my essays, but I kind of still didn't really know the person that like I thought I was and what I wanted to do in college. So that was definitely a point of stress for me. Another point of stress was definitely in, like Anwesha said, waiting. It was once you have all of these essays, I mean, writing the essays is like a marathon. It's a really tedious process, but waiting from that stretch, especially if you don't get in early, waiting from that stretch from December to like March is an extremely excruciating process if you really don't get a ton of news from schools that you really love. And so that was definitely another point of stress for me, where my parents came in and they kind of supported me and tried to like help me out in terms of my mental health and all of that. And so I think I have a pretty different experience compared to my friends after discussing with them, especially with parental support and how that came into play during my college application process. So that's kind of my story, and that's what I'll talk about a bit on the panel today.
Thank you so much, Maggie. And lastly, we have Lily.
Yeah, hi, I'm Lily. I'm a freshman at USC. So my experience with the college application process was actually pretty disheartening. I've always stayed true to the belief that I think a lot of us have in the Asian community, that if you just really work hard, you put in the effort, then you'll just get where you want to be. And because of that, I was always very self-driven. So my parents definitely set the expectations, but they weren't very hands-on in the process, throughout my childhood and high school with paying attention to grades or anything. It was always me making sure that I got all my assignments in, that I was doing extracurriculars. I was very involved in my own success. So going into my senior year, I really felt like I'd done, all the right things. I had good grades, test scores, AP classes, extracurriculars, everything that, they always say you got to do these things and you'll get there. So I did everything I thought I needed to, but when I was kind of planning for my college applications, listing out everything I was going to put on my application, I realized that everything seemed pretty generic. Nothing I did was ever particularly outstanding. And that was really difficult to address because I had done all of these things that I was passionate about. I was a dancer. I was captain of my dance team. I played piano. I had other kind of work experience, and I was very involved in these activities, and they meant a lot to me, but just they didn't seem significant. And then so fast forward to the spring, I ended up applying to 20 colleges, and I was only accepted into 6. So that was also a difficult time because it just kind of reiterated everything I was feeling throughout the process, that all the work that I put in just wasn't significant. It wasn't enough to pay off for the results that I wanted. And I don't think that it was until I started college at USC that I realized that I don't really want to be in an Ivy League. It doesn't really matter to me if I'm at Stanford versus USC, because I have the resources here that I could ever want. And I realized that all the things that I experienced in high school, they really shaped my character, and they shaped what I was passionate about. And I think that's a lot more important than the school that you get in. And so I think that your character is going to be a lot more determinant of your success and how you do in life than what school is.
Thank you so much. I think that definitely the idea of this is it mindset and the focusing on the name brand, of course, while it's not a bad thing to go to good colleges, is something that, you know, Dr. Lee and Dr. Chan also touched on, that can be that point of stressor. But thank you so much to all the panelists for sharing. I believe that now we could ask, or we could open this up to a general Q&A. So Dr. Chen and Dr. Lee, if you'd like to rejoin us, and we'll just be going through some of the questions the audience has. Actually, sorry, I wanted to ask one thing to the panelists, what do you think your parents did that helped you and versus what didn't? I know Maggie, you know, touched on having like a unique experience, but if all of the panelists could kind of talk over this, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I'll talk really quickly about sort of my experience with my parents. I actually had a really interesting conversation with them after I committed to college about how they felt during the college application process. And the interesting thing is they felt regretful that they weren't involved enough because they thought that they didn't, they were, obviously all of these Asian parents are, a lot of these Asian parents at least, or mine, are talking through WeChat about, oh, these parents did this and these kids did this. And my parents, when after talking to them, I found that they realized, or they thought that they didn't have enough of a hand in supporting me in like very overt, explicit ways during the college application process, and like, oh, like she should be applying to this and she should be doing this. But I actually found personally, at least for myself and my own sanity, I thought it was a really great experience for me to kind of go through a lot of this on my own, because I'm sure Lily and Wish are the same. Like, I'm a pretty self-driven person, and it was really useful for me to go through this process by myself without ever having another point of influence where it was like I never had a dream school going into any of this. My parents didn't even expect me to get into the school that I did, and they were really surprised when I was. So it was a really interesting process where I was supported by my parents emotionally. They were checking in on me and my mental health, and they were like, of course they asked if I got my essays done, and there were occasional freakouts where they were like, you haven't applied to enough schools, you should apply to enough schools so you don't get rejected and like have to go to like a school that you hate. And so there was definitely that, but in terms of actually getting pressured into, you have to go to this school, you have to go to the Ivy League, you have to do this and this, I found it really useful for there to not be an influence like that, and for most of the parental support to be towards my own mental health and how I should be taking care of myself. So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because my parents took a backseat role in some ways very similar to Maggie, and in some ways they didn't at all. There was never any pressure of the school I get into other than schools I was interested in, which was really helpful, especially because in a lot of ways I molded into what a lot of people perceive as very standard Asian stereotypes. For example, I'm an intended computer science major, and that makes me also kind of present in the face of very stereotypical challenges in terms of the kinds of things you need to present, or the resume you're supposed to have had, or the programming abilities you need to be able to handle immediately. And I think there was this expectation that I should have had that presented, that I've seen in general communities, even among students. And I think talking to other students at Westview, hearing that from people while I was a senior really illuminated that to me. I think what really helped with my parents is my parents, A, never played a role in the major decision I was making, or the kinds of majors I was even interested in. And they told me to apply, saying any major I wanted to do. I didn't actually, I don't think, tell them computer science was the major I was planning to until I'd already submitted one or two of my applications. And then on top of that, they were very careful in making sure I was happy. In that, I think we saw how taxing it was with my older sister, and we saw what that process looked like. And ultimately, the school my sister went to was a great school, and it fits the quote unquote name bill, but it was never the school we expected her to go to, I don't think, based on the idea of what she was interested in initially. And her major ended up changing while she was in school. And I think that taught my parents that they were right in assuming they should be open. And I think it reaffirmed that idea that they had. And I think it really helped in my application process because they had no doubts about that. And they were okay with me presenting myself in a light that they felt like reflected me. If they thought I was presenting in a way that wasn't myself when I showed them an essay, they'd tell me that. But they also did that in that their proofreading, I was happy to give them my essays, but their proofreading was very careful. It was either, hey, I read a grammar error, can you fix this comma splice? Or are you sure this sounds like you? They'd never want to be overimposing in this process though, because they wanted to make sure it did sound like me and it was me who was still speaking. And I think that really, really helped. I think also understanding the differences between us, something that they did that I was happy to be a part of, but some students might not, is that we are a religious family. And we even had me open my decisions on very auspicious times and auspicious dates, which could be really good for me. And for me, I was okay with it. I had faith in it. And I personally, I do identify. But there might be a process and decisions where some students might not be happy with that, or that might not be their way, and they want to open something immediately. And I'll be honest, opening one of my decisions 4 days late built up a lot of pressure that might not have been super optimal on my stress. So it's also okay to kind of back away from that and let go of some of the traditions if the kid might not be a part of that. And I think that was something to learn from. But other than that, I appreciated this idea of having support and being only as hands-on as the student is willing. I think that's going to be different for every student.
Yeah, so my experience with my parents was a little bit more negative, I would say, because it was sort of disappointing for us, like with the results, they weren't fulfilling into our expectations. So what happened was after the results came in, like a lot of people were like really celebrating, like people were posting on their social medias and like bragging about everything they got into. And then I remember like my parents came to me and they said like, don't post anywhere. Like they were like, don't tell people this is the school you're going to because we don't want them to know. And that was really tough because it just really felt like they were embarrassed of me and like they thought that I wasn't worth being like proud of to like show off to other people. So I think that afterwards, like I realized that it was just because like they were also disappointed and it was just in that moment they didn't really know how to handle their own feelings and they weren't really thinking about how would the student feel in that moment. So I would say to like other parents, just making sure that even if you have a disappointing result, even if like it's disappointing for you and you're upset, making sure that you still have like a connection with your child when they're going through that and still being supportive and like voicing to them that you're still proud of them for all the effort that they put into.
Thank you so much. I think hearing the panelists speak too kind of emphasizes the importance of that family relationship in this whole process. And I'm curious to, either panelists or speakers as well, do you have any advice on students who are about to go through this process in terms of how to, foster that relationship and in particular communicate with their parents?
Yeah, so I'll talk really quick about this. I think it really has to come down to what specific sort of relationship that you want with your parents during this time period. For me, it was really interesting communicating with them about my college applications because they actually like didn't know all the schools I was applying to. They really had no idea when I was turning things in or like what essays I had finished writing. It kind of depends on how involved you want your parents to be in terms of how they like play into your college applications. Like if you want an experience like on Waisha's where your parents are reading your essays, my parents actually barely read my essays. So it just kind of depends on whether or not you want your parents to be as involved in the process and what you're really looking for. Like, do you want emotional support? Do you want support on specific essays? Do you want to help bounce ideas off of somebody, or do you want somebody to kind of give you reminders? These are all things that you have to figure out for yourself in this process, and parents should really be cognizant of, because parents should play more of a supporting role during this time period. I would really highly suggest having that conversation with your parents about what the student specifically is looking for, and then the parent should be asking how can they accommodate their students or their children during this time period.
I just want to add in really briefly, Maggie, I loved everything about your answer, and you can only speak for you, but I just want to say I love that. And it's something I hear from students and parents. I hear from both sides. And it's something I talk about in general with families during college application season, but really all the time, is just the importance of communication and having things be talk aboutable at home. Dr. Lee also talked about this, and it's hard, and especially in families where kind of that two-way communication isn't the norm. And again, at the risk of stereotyping, I think in a lot of Asian families, we talk about all sorts of things and all sorts of other things that we really are not used to talking to our parents about, and parents aren't used to talking to their kids about. So it will take effort on both sides. So Maggie, your idea, which I love, of saying, can you ask for what you need? Can you share with your parents what would be most helpful through this time in your life? And then again, it requires the parents to hear it, but parents, can you also then share that back in return? And really there has to be a dialogue around it. So I really, really love that, and hope you all could think about incorporating that in some way.
On that note of, mental health topics being sometimes difficult things to talk about, do you or Dr. Lee have any, I guess, basic mental health information or like psychoeducation to give to the audience? I know oftentimes even just the words mental health can carry a negative connotation when used incorrectly. So do you have any like basic information you'd want to just get out to the audience?
I'm sure Dr. Lee has things to add. I'll say really briefly, Daniel, this could be a whole webinar in and of itself, so don't get me started. But thank you for asking. Mental health is, we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health, right? We all have minds and bodies and emotions. So like on a really, really, really basic level, mental health isn't bad. Like we all have mental health, and we want to have good mental health, just like we want to have good physical health. It's really that simple. And so one of my biggest professional goals is to try to help decrease mental health stigma and increase mental health literacy. The other, like, I guess, little psychoeducation that you're asking for, Daniel, I want to mention is just mental health issues are widely common. They're common, they are treatable, and in many cases, they're preventable. So 1 in 5 individuals will have a mental health disorder at some point in their lifetime. That's 1 in 5. 50% develop by age 14 and 75% by age 24. So the whole point is that they develop in childhood and adolescence. We want to catch it early. And one of the biggest risk factors for many mental health conditions like depression, like anxiety, is stress. This is the way in which many things are actually, mental health issues are actually preventable. So if we can have things be talk aboutable, if kids and teens can be supported at school and at home, if we can catch difficulties early, and if we can keep stress in check, all of those things are good, like self-care. I'll pause there because I'm sure Dr. Lee and others may have things to add.
I just want to underscore that the notion of starting early. What we know about teenage years is also habit forming years, which means that if you get into good habits about how you take care of yourself, you're more likely to carry those habits into adulthood. And so if you're really good about making sure you sleep well, you eat well, you exercise, when you're an adult, that's just going to be more second nature to you. And guess what? Stress will keep coming in life, right? It's not just about high school. It's not just about college. It's going to be about a career. It's going to be about when you start your own families. Life is just a lot of challenges. But the earlier you can learn to cope with challenges effectively and healthily, those habits are going to come with you when you're an adult, and that's really, really going to be great and buffer against any mental health disorder that may develop. But I think I agree with Dr. Chen. Mental health, we all have it, just like we have physical health, financial health, mental health is one of the, right? All of this is just important things we all kind of want to do a temperature check regularly to make sure we are doing well by all that we are.
Looks like we have one question that's been up.
If I could just add one more thing.
Oh,
I think, yeah, don't get caught up in diagnosis. Don't get caught up in trying to label, because I think that can actually sometimes be conversation stoppers. What you want to think about, and what you're talking about with your parents, or parents are talking with your child, is, are you happy, right? How are you feeling? Do you, really using general terms. I caution people against saying, well, are you depressed? Are you anxious? Are you, because those terms can come with its own connotations, and we don't want to add more stress. What we want to just understand is, how's it going? You know, are you able to sleep at night? Are you finding peace in your thoughts? Are you happy? Just start there. Could be really, really helpful. I think about people in my family, you know, they don't know things like depression or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. These are not terms that people are familiar with. So leave that to the professionals. When you're talking with your families, just try to check in on how they're doing in general.
I think that's so important. If I may briefly add on, Daniel, because I actually get this question a lot from parents, and I think parents understandably want to know, oh gosh, is this a bigger worry? Is this a fill in the blank, depression, et cetera? And what, and then what does that mean? Don't worry about the diagnosis, as Dr. Lee said. And if you find that you have a bigger worry, that you feel like things aren't really going so well, that there's an impact on functioning, you have a bigger worry about your child or teen, please, please, please don't have that worry alone. I'm also always telling kids and teens and parents, never worry alone. So if you find yourself with a worry, talk with your teenager or partner. If you feel like it's a bigger worry, talk to the school teacher, the school counselor, and then you always have your child's pediatrician. A lot of people don't realize or think about their pediatrician, but every child has a pediatrician. You can talk to your pediatrician. So you don't need to diagnose. The pediatrician can help assess. And if the pediatrician thinks that mental health evaluation is warranted, then they could help refer.
Thank you so much. One question we got that was upvoted a little bit was, what advice do you have on how to build self-esteem for Asian students? So if any panelist or speaker wants to answer this, that'd be great.
I addressed this a little in my talk, but I'd love to give some of the other panelists a chance to share their thoughts or add on, and I'm happy to add on as well if helpful.
Yeah, I think the first thing I realized towards the end of my high school career is a lot of my high school career was spent in different ways creating that toxic culture of comparison. Whether or not I wanted to be a part of it, it was central to almost everything I ended up doing. And I think it's really easy to feel like you can attribute that to also something like a competitive event, but doing a competitive event doesn't necessarily warrant that you have to compete against those you're surrounded by in the idea of life itself, or in the idea of they have outperformed you because you're not good enough. I think what I found myself learning and realizing towards the end was that I really needed to practice something I preached, which was kind of just embracing my growth and embracing everything I was doing wrong as a reason that I could see places I'd improve, and as a reason I could see places that I would become a better person. Because it is that mindset of otherwise cultivating a reason to have imposter syndrome or an inferiority complex in too many ways. And that pervades through. I'm very much still experience it. I can't tell you I don't experience it in any way, because I can easily compare myself to classmates I have right now. And I can say, oh, I am failing on this bout, or I'm not failing in this bout. And I think what I really thank a lot of the people I had around me for is reminding me that I need to be comfortable. And that also means finding people who will make me feel that way, because it's really easy to surround yourself with people who force you to compare yourself and who force you to have conversations that you shouldn't have to have, of why am I doing well? Why am I not doing well? How do I do better in an exact event that in a couple of years won't matter anymore? My high school speech and debate points that were based off how many tournaments I competed in and how many random wins and losses I had will never matter. Not anymore. They never did in high school. They were the means of draining yourself. And I think realizing I did everything I did to enjoy it was so much more important to me than anything else I did. Is as long as I could find myself enjoying the people I was around and enjoying the person I was trying to become, I'd be able to grow. Because otherwise, your growth is limited by your idea of how to knock others down rather than how to raise yourself up.
Another question we got was, my teen had been really close to me until last year. He played more and more games. Recently, he started to miss homework. So I blocked his games. He is now really hostile to me and threatened to skip the school and do nothing, and he did. What should I do now?
I think there were also some other questions about parents who were struggling in their relationship with their teenager and communication. So I'm going to try to address them all in different ways, and maybe Dr. Lee would help chime in. I think we touched on this a little bit already in terms of this idea of like, oh, a parent maybe has a worry and how much should I worry? In this particular case, it sounds like the worry might be a little bit bigger. Of course, we don't know your son, but it sounds like there was a change in kind of his baseline functioning and the change in which he's interacting with you. So if you haven't already, I would strongly, strongly encourage you first talking with your teenager, really in a calm and open-hearted and open-minded way, and to really, really be open to hearing what he might be willing to share with you. And it might just be a little bit, and I'll say a little bit about communication in just a second, but to first talk with him and maybe see what's going on for him, because right now we don't really know. I would really, really partner with the school, because even though if he's missed some school, the school may also be able to provide some incredibly helpful guidance and information here. I'm sure Dr. Lee could say a little bit more, but schools are your partners and friends. They are huge allies in this. And then, as I was mentioning earlier, this idea of not warring alone. So after school, the school can help you think through additional resources and whether next steps are warranted. And Dr. Lee, I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about this, because I think I value my partnership with schools so much.
Yeah. So to back up a little bit, I think it's important for us to remember what happens in teenage years. And one of the developmental tasks of a teenage years is actually to individualize, separate from parents, right? And so parents, when your kids are pushing back at you, they're supposed to do that. It's not fun, you don't like it, but this is actually part of what they're supposed to do in the next few years. And so it's actually developmentally appropriate for students to push back. The other thing that we notice about teenagers is that they're no longer in an age when they're just going to do what you tell them, right? They're going to need to know the rationale behind the rules. They need to understand why some of the limits are being set as they are. And better yet, invite students to come up with, okay, if you're setting some limits for screen time, well, what do you think? How much time do you think you need to play on a game? Why don't you and I kind of negotiate around some of these rules? If you can get your teens to buy in and have those conversations, they're going to go a lot easier than if you just say, I'm cutting off your screen. Why is partnering with school so important? Because you have other adult voices. Because remember what I said, it is developmentally appropriate right now for your young adult to push against you because you're mom and dad. But another adult can say the exact same thing that you're saying, and they can actually hear it a little better. And that drives parents crazy, right? Parents will say to me, I told them that, and I'm like, I know there's nothing magical that I'm saying, but the only reason why it lands well is because I am not their parent, right? So you want to partner with schools because there are going to be other adults who can come in and help guide without the emotional stuff that parents and child have right now. You also have schools that have a different lens and can help you set some of those limits. And frankly, sometimes students respond better to school limits right now than they do to parental limits. And so you want to partner and do a little dance with school professionals so that together you can guide the student who's still a child learning, right? One, their independence, but also have some guideposts of what they should be doing with their time and energy in their future.
I so appreciate that kind of like that developmental framework, Dr. Lee, and it is so true. Kind of normative adolescent development is about pushing back, and it makes it so hard for parents. And to what make it doubly hard is that I would ask you to keep trying. And doesn't mean that you have to insist that they talk to you, but what it means is you're in a really difficult position, that you care, you offer your support, and sometimes you may get nothing back or you may get pushback, but it doesn't mean that you then close off. You basically want to be there for when they're ready to come back to you. And that's a really, really, really hard thing to ask parents to do. It's hard, but you want to just keep those channels open. So when there is a bigger issue, they know they can come to you if and when they need to, and agree with everything that Dr. Lee said.
One question we got that I think definitely applies to a lot of the Asian American community is, what tips do you have for teens who are first generation students? And how best can parents help them if they have never been through the process?
Could you say that again, Daniel? Is it how parents of first generation students could help their students through the process?
Yes, parents of first generation students.
Dr. Lee, I don't know if your school, if your department, my guessing it might have some more experience in this particular, like specific experience here.
Yeah, I think if parents themselves don't have the experiences similar to my own, finding other professionals, other adults that you can talk to, other mentors in school can be really, really critical. Parents, you don't always have to have the answers, right? But the direction, the support may be guiding your student to talk to other adults on campus. We have tons of students who come and talk with us here at the Counseling Center at Phillips Exeter Academy to figure out the college process. We also have a college counseling office where students can go and ask all the questions that they might have. And so again, if you're a parent, there may be some guilt that you feel that you don't have all the answers. That's okay. You brought your student here, and connecting them with other adults who can is just as effective.
Going off of Anwesha mentioned imposter syndrome. What advice do you have with dealing with imposter syndrome? And this person says, especially as Asian American women.
I still have it. I think, if we look at imposter syndrome and flip it on the other side of the coin, it means that you're pushing yourself and that you are surrounding yourself with outstanding people. And that's a good thing. And then if you want to look around and think, well, I'm one of those outstanding people, great, right? But I think that imposter syndrome may just be a good self-reflection of like, oh, wow, this is new for me. This is different for me, but good. I've worked hard, right? To have this surrounding me. And so I think it's a good thing. And reminding yourself that you're in it. And the fact that you are in it says something about yourself. And I think as an Asian woman, particularly in academia and in hospital settings, oftentimes because I appear younger, probably not anymore, but when I was doing my training and coming up, I appear younger. And so people wouldn't respect me as much or would assume that I'm not done with my training yet. And there was a lot of that. I think we had to fight through a lot of stereotypes, a lot of that bamboo ceiling that we've talked about. But we keep at it, and you think about reaching out to mentors and other people that have paved the way and pick their brains about how to do this can be really, really important.
One question was, for the panelists, are you at your first choice colleges? Did you consider taking gap year if you didn't get into your top choices? A bit lost on how to respond to my child who has heart set on one college and insists on a gap year if they don't get accepted. And I guess this question also plays well into maybe the uncertainty of this year. So if panelists, if you'd like to talk on maybe how COVID has impacted your mental health through this process, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I can talk really quickly. Like I said, I didn't really have a top choice college. I kind of went into this whole thing really blind because I really didn't know what I wanted when I went to college. It really scared me to actually pick a major or even pick a bunch of colleges that I thought I wanted to go to. For example, I'm at Cornell right now, and the major that I am in, like the program that I'm in, I literally never considered until I actually started applying for college. It's industrial and labor relations. And like, I had no idea what that was at all. So I didn't have a top choice college. I didn't really know even specifically what I wanted out of like the college experience at the time. And so I can't really speak it specifically to somebody who has their heart dead set on a college, but if I could give a piece of advice actually is, I know it's hard, but it really makes the whole application process a lot easier if you don't have your heart set on a specific college, and if you're open to that kind of growth and figuring out that, oh, the colleges that accept me are accepting me because I match the culture there, not because I'm like destined for this college. And so that was actually a really useful mindset for me applying to colleges, because I didn't have these expectations. I realized that the colleges that accepted me, especially in retrospect, were taking me in because they thought I would be a good fit, and I should really just trust the process.
The question we had was, my daughter and I have a pretty good relationship. I think I can, looks like the question just moved up. My daughter and I have a pretty good relationship. I think I can talk to her about any topic, but I feel that she doesn't like to share her feelings with me, especially the negative ones. When I bring up mental health issues, or when I invite her to join me in seminars like this, she'd say, "You think I'm depressed?" Which I don't, but I'm not. I want to be there for her when she's down, but how do I tell her that in addition to her friends, she can also share her down moments with me? So this is maybe another question on that family relationship.
I think this gets to what Dr. Lee was saying a little bit earlier. And it doesn't mean, if you're fortunate to have a teenager who chats with you and opens to you, and there are teenagers like that for sure. But in general, developmentally, it's normal and healthy for teens to pull back, from their parents, to not share everything that's going on with them. That's part of where they're kind of building that muscle and practicing how to be independent. So it's actually a really good thing. And so it's hard to just try not to take it personally, unless there's a bigger worry. Know that it's actually okay for your teen to not necessarily talk with you. But again, the goal is to have them know that there is an open channel, so they can come to you if and when they need to.
And
If I may, I'm so sorry, Daniel. If I may add, because I know the other question, or maybe two ago, there was a question in there about, do the panelists all get into their first choice school? And I see in the Q&A, I think there's a few threads of this too. I guess I'd like to share. I sometimes worry, as Dr. Lee and I coming in as so to speak experts, and both of us being at supposed like top institutions, et cetera, that we ourselves are reinforcing a certain message to kids and parents out there, that a certain level of attainment or certain name is necessary. And I have no shame in telling all of you, when I was in college, even though this is a long, long time ago, or high school senior, I did not get into any of my top schools, into any of them. And I applied to a whole bunch of Ivy League schools, and I didn't get into any of them. And it was devastating. And it's possible that someone said this to me, but if they did, I didn't hear it. And I'm pretty sure actually I never did get the message that I was okay, that I was not a failure, that things would work out for me. And if I were a different kind of kid, this isn't saying anything great or remarkable about me. This is my genetics and my personality and my temperament. Fortunately, I had a lot of other kind of resiliency factors on my side. But if I were a different kind of kid, that failure could have, it did hit me hard. It could have hit me even more hard, and it could have really, really thrown me off. So I didn't go to my top choice school. I didn't even go to one of my top 5 schools. And it can be okay. So I guess I want to just say explicitly, I understand there are certain degrees after my name and certain institutions that go along with my name, but those things also don't define me. And I'm a million other things aside from those things, including a whole bunch of rejection letters and various jobs, and jobs that I liked and jobs that I didn't like. And I could go on, but I don't think anyone needs to cares about the details of my life. But I guess I just want to say really, really explicitly, I recognize that there are a lot of top institutions represented here, but I think we all have different backgrounds and stories, and they all kind of have their value and worth and success, if that makes sense.
And so one more question, maybe this is more on the application side of the webinar, but is it okay to talk about mental health struggles in the college application, and would it have a negative impact?
I don't know, Dr. Lee, if you have experience on that. And unfortunately, I'm not on the college admissions side, so you might be able to speak a little bit more with more knowledgeably.
The answer is yes. And let me contextualize it a little bit. So I work in a high school, and we have a thing called medical leave. And what that means is that a student might pause and take a break from school while they deal with often mental health issues. And when there's a medical leave, it's on your record, right? And so a lot of times when it's time to apply for college, college seniors are trying to figure out, well, how do I explain that? Do I need to explain that? Can I explain that? And I really think it's up to the individual. You don't have to if you don't want to. If you would like to, it could be an opportunity. I really think it's about how you tell your story. I think that Anisha mentioned that earlier in her conversation. It's about the story you tell about yourself. And I can't tell you how many times I work with a student who told that story, and that their struggle and of the mental health is part of their story. It's a story of growth. It's a story of self-reflection and self-awareness. It's a story of being humble by something in their life, and really looking back and being able to say, wow, that leave was hard, was not what I wanted, but boy, I'm better because of, right? You can tell that story in a very authentic way, and not just, well, I was depressed and out of school, right? It's about how you choose to tell that story. So, and again, coming from a mental health perspective, I think it is something to share. It is something you can write. And our college counselors would support that. I've never heard a college counselor call me and say, you know, so-and-so is writing about their medical leave, or so-and-so is writing about their mental health, and I'm trying to get them not to. In my 8 years at Phillips Exeter Academy, that has never been a conversation. It's been more of a conversation of empowering that individual to be willing to tell that story, even if mental health is part of their journey. Parents may be a little nervous in some of this sharing, just because some parents, especially Asian identifying parents, want to keep things more private. So there may be some conversations there, but I think so. I think if it's something that you want to share and it's a part of how you put your package together, it can actually be a very positive thing.
Thank you so much. It does look like we are coming up on our time for today's webinar. So if we get the next slide, please, that'd be great. But I just wanted to say, I apologize to anyone if we didn't get to answering your question. This is actually part 1 of a series. So if you're looking to maybe attend our part 2, we'd invite you to join. It's the same Zoom link you received in your confirmation email for next week. Dr. Chen will also quickly answer any questions if you know, in the time we have left. But yeah, this next episode will be about mental health in college. So today's session was mainly about the application process, what to expect. And next time we've invited speakers in college and Dr. Bonnie Liao to talk on this. Thank you again so much to our speakers, Dr. Lee and Dr. Chen, as well as our amazing panelists, Anweisha, Maggie, and Lily, for your insights, experiences. And we hope that you've given the audience members some strategies, and we hope the audience members can take these strategies and implement them rather either for themselves or for their families, and that this information was helpful. So again, if you like this webinar, check it out. Check out part 2 next week at the same time on November 8th. And thank you again to Let's Talk so much for this amazing opportunity. The Let's Talk virtual conference will actually be ongoing into next year. So if you'd like to learn more about the events and look for events like this one, please visit the link here. You can see on the screen, it says the Let's Talk website. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a good night. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for attending.